Waitress Sofia Bellini wanted nothing more than to leave the cafe behind, but one final delivery brought her face to face with death itself. She found 2 German shepherds convulsing on ancient stone, their bodies failing in real time. But these weren't just beloved pets. They were the only living souls trusted by Rome's most feared Mafia don, Vittorio Morello. She hadn't just stumbled upon a medical emergency. She'd unknowingly walked into the center of an assassination plot meant for the most dangerous man in Italy. Now the Don's cold eyes are on her, and in the Morello family, witnesses don't walk away. Please support us by subscribing and telling us where you are watching from. Let's begin the story. The morning had started like any other at Café Imperial, which meant it had started badly. Sofia's alarm hadn't gone off. Her landlord had slipped another overdue notice under her door, and the shower in her cramped studio apartment had run cold after 30 seconds. She'd arrived at the cafe with wet hair and a knot of anxiety in her stomach that 3 years of financial crisis had made permanent. By noon, she was 4 hours into what would become a 12-hour double shift. Her feet ached in shoes that needed replacing, and her lower back sent up regular complaints that she'd learned to ignore. The cafe itself was beautiful in that effortless Roman way, all marble countertops, gleaming espresso machines, and floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out onto a cobblestone piazza where tourists photographed everything and locals moved with purposeful grace. Sofia preferred the tourists. They tipped better and didn't notice when your hands shook from exhaustion. She was balancing a tray of 4 espressos when Marco, the manager, grabbed her elbow. His fingers dug in with unnecessary force, and his voice dropped to an urgent hiss. "Table 7. Now. Don't make him wait." She glanced at table 7 and felt her stomach drop. 3 men in suits that probably cost more than her annual rent sat in the corner booth, the one with the best light and the most privacy. The man in the middle wasn't looking at the menu. He wasn't looking at anything, really, just existing in a way that made the air around him seem different, heavier. Vittorio Morello. She'd seen his photograph in the newspapers, though they were always careful about what they printed. The articles used words like alleged and rumored and business interests, but everyone in Rome knew what he really was. Sofia approached the table with the kind of careful neutrality she'd perfected over 3 years of serving people who treated waitresses like furniture. She set down the small cups with practiced precision, working from the outside in, keeping her eyes down and her movements efficient. "Gentlemen," she murmured, already preparing to retreat. She was turning away when her hip caught the edge of the marble table. It wasn't much, barely a nudge, but it was enough. The tray tilted, and a single espresso cup slid toward the edge in what felt like slow motion. She lunged for it, caught it, but the dark liquid had already sloshed over the rim. 3 drops of espresso landed on the white marble surface. 2 more splattered onto the cuff of Vittorio Morello's shirt, crisp white cotton, probably Italian, definitely expensive. The cafe didn't go silent. That only happened in movies. But Sofia felt the silence anyway, a bubble of it surrounding table 7, insulating this moment from the rest of the world's noise. "I'm so sorry," she said immediately, reaching for her towel. "Let me." "Don't." The word was quiet, almost gentle. Vittorio didn't move his arm, didn't look at the stain, didn't acknowledge it at all. His eyes, dark and measuring, fixed on her face. "What's your name?" "Sofia Bellini, sir." "I'm terribly sorry. I'll pay for the cleaning." "Marco." He wasn't speaking loudly, but somehow the manager appeared within seconds, his face already pale. "This one is careless." "Signor Morello, I apologize profusely," Marco started. "I don't want your apology." Vittorio's voice remained conversational, almost pleasant. "I want her gone. Now." Not at the end of her shift. "Now." Sophia's throat tightened. "Sir, please, I need this job." "You needed it." He finally looked down at his cuff, then back at her, and something in his expression made her blood run cold. Not anger, that she could have understood. This was something else. Indifference. She was a problem solved, a minor irritation removed, as simple as erasing a smudge from glass. "You don't anymore." Marco's hand was already on her shoulder, pulling her backward. "Get your things. You have 5 minutes." She wanted to argue, to plead, to explain about the medical school debt, and the rent, and the elderly mother in Napoli who needed money for her medications. But the words died in her throat because she could see it wouldn't matter. Nothing she said would matter to the man who'd just destroyed her life without raising his voice or changing his expression. 10 minutes later, Sophia stood on the sun-baked piazza with her purse and a small bag of personal items, watching tourists take smiling selfies while her entire world crumbled around her. She had 43 euros in her bank account and rent due in 6 days. She didn't know that in less than 4 hours she would see Vittorio Morello again, and this time he would be the one begging her for help. Sophia found the courier job on a bulletin board outside a grocery store in Trastevere, written on a grease-stained index card in someone's hurried scrawl. "Need driver, 1 delivery, cash payment 50 euros. There was a phone number and nothing else. She called from the street corner, and a woman answered on the first ring. "You have a car?" "A scooter," Sophia said, watching her last chance evaporate. "Fine. Address is Via dei Condotti, 147. Pick up at 4, delivery by 6. Don't be late." The line went dead before Sophia could ask questions like where she was delivering to, or what she was delivering, or whether this was even legal. But 50 euros was 50 euros, and beggars couldn't afford the luxury of caution. The package was larger than she'd expected, an insulated catering box that barely fit in the scooter's rear cargo space. It smelled like roasted meat and herbs, expensive food for expensive people. The delivery address was written on a yellow sticky note: Villa Morello, Via Appia Antica, KM7. Sophia's hands had frozen on the handlebars when she read the name. Of course it was his villa. Of course the universe had that particular sense of humor. She'd considered abandoning the job right then, leaving the box on the sidewalk and disappearing into Rome's crowded streets. But 43 euros didn't pay rent, and her pride had already been trampled once today. What was one more humiliation? The ride took 40 minutes through increasingly sparse countryside. The ancient Appian Way stretched before her, that legendary Roman road now flanked by umbrella pines and scattered villas that spoke of old money and older power. Villa Morello sat behind high stone walls crowned with security cameras that tracked her approach like predatory eyes. She pressed the intercom button with a trembling finger. "Delivery," she said to the static. The gate swung open silently, revealing a long gravel driveway lined with cypress trees. The villa itself was beautiful in that casual way that only centuries of inherited wealth could achieve. Honey-colored stone, terracotta roof tiles, climbing roses that looked artfully wild, but were probably maintained by a team of gardeners. Sophia parked near the service entrance and lifted the catering box, her arms already aching. A man in a dark suit emerged from a side door, examined the box without looking at her face, and disappeared back inside. She was turning to leave, already mentally spending the 50 euros on the most pressing bills, when she heard it. A sound like nothing she'd ever heard before, a choked, wet gagging that raised every hair on the back of her neck. She turned. 2 German shepherds had emerged from behind the main house, moving with the kind of synchronized grace that spoke of extensive training. They were magnificent animals, all muscle and intelligence, their coats gleaming in the late afternoon sun. But something was wrong. Terribly, catastrophically wrong. The larger one, Bruno, she would later learn, stumbled mid-stride. His legs buckled, and he went down hard on the stone pavement, his body convulsing. The second dog, Rex, made it 3 more steps before his legs gave out too. White foam bubbled from their mouths, their bodies jerked and twisted, and their eyes, those intelligent, alert eyes, had gone wide with animal panic. "Hey!" Sophia dropped her helmet and ran toward them, her exhaustion forgotten. "Someone help! The dogs are—" The side door burst open. 3 men in suits poured out, hands already reaching for weapons at their hips. Behind them came Vittorio Morello himself, still in his white shirt. A different one. Sophia noticed absurdly, his face transformed by something she hadn't seen in the cafe. Fear. Raw, undisguised fear. "Bruno!" He was running now, this man who probably never ran, dropping to his knees beside the larger dog with complete disregard for his expensive clothes. "Rex! No, no, no!" Bruno's body convulsed again, his paws scrabbling against the stone. Pink-tinged foam spilled from his mouth, and his breathing came in desperate, wheezing gasps. "Don't just stand there!" Morello's voice cracked like a whip, all that careful control shattered. "Call Dottore Ricci! Call him now!" One of the suits was already on his phone, but Sophia could see from his expression that something was wrong. "Boss, he's not answering. It goes straight to voicemail." "Then call someone else." "Call every veterinarian in Rome." Sophia stood frozen at the edge of the scene, watching the most feared man in the city cradle a dying dog in his arms, while his empire of killers stood helpless. And then she smelled it. Bitter almonds, faint but unmistakable, cutting through the scent of garden roses and summer heat. Her veterinary training, dormant for 3 years, roared back to life. "It's cyanide," she heard herself say. "They've been poisoned." The words had barely left Sophia's mouth when 3 guns snapped toward her chest. The metallic clicks of safeties disengaging punctuated the air like death sentences being typed out. "The food!" one of the guards snarled, his weapon steady in a way that suggested he'd pointed it at people before. "She brought the poisoned food. I didn't—" Sophia's voice came out strangled. She could see her own death in their eyes, could feel how close she was to becoming another body disappeared into the Roman countryside. "Wait." Vittorio's hand shot up, palm out, a conductor freezing an orchestra mid-note. His other arm still cradled Bruno's convulsing body. "The dogs haven't eaten yet. They never eat until 7. It's not the food." "Then how does she know it's poison?" Another guard moved closer, his gun's barrel a black hole in Sophia's peripheral vision. "Boss, she's the only stranger here. Because I can smell it!" Sophia's fear crystallized into something sharper, something that cut through the paralysis. 3 years of waitressing disappeared, and she was back in the veterinary college lab, back when she still had a future. Bitter almonds. That's cyanide. Hydrogen cyanide. They're dying right now. And if you shoot me, they're dead in 5 minutes. Bruno's body arched backward, his spine bowing in a seizure that made Vittorio's face go grey. Rex's breathing had become a horrible, rattling wheeze, pink foam now streaming from both nostrils. "She could be lying," the first guard said, but his certainty had wavered. "Look at them." Sophia took a step forward, and every gun barrel tracked the movement. She didn't care anymore. She couldn't watch animals die, not even for self-preservation, not even with 3 guns aimed at her heart. Look at the foam, the convulsions, the rapid onset. This is classic cyanide poisoning. Minutes matter. Seconds matter. Vittorio's dark eyes locked onto hers, and she saw him calculating behind the fear. Weighing her life against his dogs' lives, measuring truth against deception. Running odds that she couldn't begin to guess. What do you need? His voice was steady again, that iron control reasserting itself. Hydrogen peroxide, 3% solution, and activated charcoal if you have it. We don't stock veterinary supplies, one of the guards interjected. Then get it from your medicine cabinet. First aid kit, bathroom, anywhere. Hydrogen peroxide for cleaning wounds. Move! The command came out with an authority Sophia didn't know she possessed, sharp enough to actually make the man flinch. Go, Vittorio said quietly, and the guard ran. Sophia dropped to her knees beside Rex, the stone pavement hot even through her work pants. The dog's eyes had rolled back, showing white. His tongue lolled, purple-tinged from his mouth. She put her hands on his chest, feeling the racing heart beneath fur and muscle. We need to induce vomiting, flush whatever's left in their systems. Then the charcoal will bind to remaining toxins in the gut. Her fingers moved on autopilot, checking Rex's gums, pale, almost white, his pulse thready and irregular. How long ago did this start? 5 minutes, maybe less. Vittorio's voice cracked again. They were fine. They were running, playing, and then, what did they drink, eat, touch? Nothing. They've been outside all afternoon, in the garden. They have water bowls by the... He stopped, and something shifted in his expression. Something cold and lethal. The water bowls. The guard returned at a dead sprint, carrying a brown bottle of hydrogen peroxide and a white first aid kit. Sophia snatched them both, her hands moving with the kind of precision that 3 years couldn't erase. Hold Rex's head. Tilt it back. She barked the order at the nearest guard, who looked at Vittorio for permission. Now! We don't have time for your chain of command. The man moved, surprisingly gentle for someone who'd been ready to shoot her 30 seconds ago. Sophia measured out the peroxide by eye. Too little, and it wouldn't work. Too much, and she'd cause more damage. This is going to be unpleasant, she said, more to herself than anyone else. She pried Rex's jaws open and poured the liquid down his throat. The effect was almost immediate. Rex's body convulsed, and he vomited violently, expelling whatever remained in his stomach across the ancient stone pavement. The smell was horrific, but Sophia had never been so grateful for anything in her life. Again, she said, preparing another dose. And someone needs to do the same for Bruno. Vittorio, can you do it? The Don of Rome, the man who'd destroyed her life 4 hours ago, looked at her with something that might have been respect. Tell me how, he said. The sun had shifted by the time Sophia felt confident enough to sit back on her heels. Her knees screamed in protest, 2 hot points of agony, where bone met unforgiving stone. Sweat had soaked through her black polo shirt, creating dark patches that spread across her back and under her arms. Her hands, steadier than they'd been in years, finally began to tremble. Bruno lay on his side, his breathing no longer the desperate rattle that had torn at her heart. It was shallow, yes, and his gums were still too pale, but it was breathing. Real breathing. Rex had stopped convulsing 10 minutes ago, and now lay with his head in her lap, his eyes half open and tracking her movements with an awareness that hadn't been there before. Water, Sophia said, her voice hoarse. She'd been giving orders for over an hour, and her throat felt like sandpaper. Clean water, room temperature, and I need blankets. Shock can still kill them even if the poison doesn't. A guard materialized with bottles of San Pellegrino and what looked like cashmere throws from inside the villa. Sophia would have laughed at the absurdity, wrapping dying dogs in fabric that probably cost more than her security deposit, but she was too exhausted for laughter. Vittorio Morello hadn't moved from his position 3 feet away. He'd stayed there the entire time, kneeling on the same stones that had to be punishing his knees as badly as they were punishing hers. His white shirt was ruined, stained with vomit and blood and the general chaos of emergency veterinary medicine. His hands, which she imagined had signed death warrants and broken bones, hovered uselessly at his sides. She'd forgotten he was a monster. That was the dangerous part. For the last hour, he'd just been a man watching his family die, following her instructions with the kind of desperate obedience that spoke of complete helplessness. He'd held Bruno's head when she needed him to. He'd run for more supplies without question. He'd even helped clean up the worst of the vomit, his expensive shoes ruined beyond repair. Will they live? His voice was barely above a whisper, as if speaking too loudly might shatter whatever fragile progress they'd made. Sophia ran her hand along Rex's flank, feeling the rise and fall of his ribcage. His heart rate had stabilized. Not normal, not yet, but no longer the racing panic that signaled imminent cardiac arrest. "I think so," she said carefully. The hydrogen peroxide purged most of the poison before it could fully absorb. The activated charcoal. She gestured to the mess around them, evidence of the paste she'd forced down both dogs' throats. Should bind to whatever's left in their systems, but they need real veterinary care. IV fluids, oxygen therapy, monitoring. Dottore Ricci still isn't answering. The guard who'd made the statement looked uncomfortable, as if delivering bad news to Vittorio Morello was a good way to end up as bad news yourself. None of his associates are answering either. Sophia saw Vittorio's jaw tighten, saw the calculation happening behind those dark eyes. His personal veterinarian suddenly unreachable. The dogs poisoned. The pieces connecting themselves into a picture that made the air feel heavy with unspoken violence. "Then she stays," Vittorio said simply. "Until they're stable. Until I know they'll survive." It wasn't a request. Sophia opened her mouth to protest. She had rent to pay, a life to salvage, and staying in a Mafia Don's villa was approximately the worst idea she could imagine. But Rex chose that moment to lift his head and look at her. His dark eyes, clearer now, held something that might have been gratitude or might have been simple animal confusion. Either way, it made her chest tight. "They shouldn't be moved yet," she heard herself say. "Not for at least a few hours. We need to monitor for secondary complications, seizures, respiratory distress, cardiac arrhythmia. Then you'll monitor them here." Vittorio stood slowly, his knees cracking audibly. He looked down at her, and for the first time since the cafe, really looked at her. Not through her, not past her, but at her. "You saved their lives." "I studied veterinary medicine," Sophia said, the words coming out defensive. "Before I had to drop out, before I became a waitress you could fire for spilling coffee." She regretted it immediately. "You didn't talk to men like Vittorio Morello that way. You didn't remind them of the power they held over you, didn't draw attention to your own vulnerability." But he just nodded, something unreadable crossing his face. "Marco," he called, and one of the guards stepped forward. Not the cafe manager, a different Marco, this one built like a concrete wall. "Bring blankets, water, and food for Signorina Bellini. She'll be working through the night." The sun was setting now, painting the Tuscan sky in shades of orange and pink that belonged in paintings, not in moments like this. Sophia settled more comfortably on the stones, one hand on Bruno, the other on Rex. She'd come here to deliver food and collect 50 euros. Instead, she'd stepped into something far more dangerous than she could possibly understand. Dawn came slowly to Villa Morello, creeping across the Tuscan hills like something reluctant to witness what happened in places like this. Sophia woke in a bed so soft it felt like floating, momentarily disoriented by ceiling frescoes and silk curtains that probably cost more than her entire apartment building. The guest suite was obscene in its luxury. Marble bathroom, walk-in closet, a balcony overlooking gardens that stretched toward cypress-lined horizons. Someone had left clothes for her, simple but expensive, in exactly her size, which was somehow more unsettling than if they'd been wrong. It meant Vittorio's people were efficient. It meant they paid attention. She'd tried to leave twice during the night, the first time around midnight, after Bruno and Rex had both fallen into what looked like genuine sleep rather than poison-induced unconsciousness. Marco, the concrete wall version, had been posted outside the villa's main entrance. "The Don says you stay until morning," he'd said, not unkindly. "The dogs need monitoring." The second time, at 3 a.m., she'd made it as far as the driveway before another guard had appeared from the shadows, materializing like something summoned. "The guest suite is more comfortable, Signorina. The Don insists." The Don insists. That phrase seemed to be the answer to every question, the solution to every problem, the end of every conversation. Now, as morning light filtered through silk curtains, Sophia found her scooter keys on the bedside table, placed there sometime while she slept, which meant someone had been in her room, which meant locks meant nothing here. Beside the keys was a note in precise handwriting. "The dogs are asking for you." Pass. She dressed in the borrowed clothes, soft grey cotton pants and a simple white blouse that fit perfectly, and followed the sound of voices to a terrace overlooking the garden. Bruno and Rex lay on cushioned dog beds that looked more comfortable than most human furniture, both alert and watching her approach with recognition that made her throat tight. "They ate this morning," Vittorio said without turning around. He stood at the terrace railing, looking out over his domain. He'd changed clothes, too. Dark pants, white shirt, no tie, but the shadows under his eyes suggested he'd slept as little as she had. Drank water, no vomiting, no distress. Sophia knelt beside Bruno, running her hands over him with practiced efficiency. Heart rate good, gums pink, eyes clear. Rex pushed his nose into her palm, and she felt an unwelcome surge of affection for these animals who'd almost died in front of her. "They need to see a real veterinarian," she said, standing. "Blood work, liver function tests, kidney monitoring. Cyanide poisoning can cause delayed organ damage. Dottore Ricci's body was found this morning." Vittorio's voice was conversational, as if he were discussing the weather. "In his clinic, single gunshot to the head. His phone records show 3 missed calls from this villa yesterday, all during the time Bruno and Rex were dying." Sophia's hand froze on Rex's head. The dog leaned into her touch, oblivious to the fact that his regular veterinarian had been murdered. "The water bowls," Vittorio continued, still not looking at her. "We had them tested overnight. Sodium cyanide dissolved in the water. Enough to kill both dogs within minutes." He finally turned, and his eyes held something cold and precise. "The bowls are filled every day at 3 p.m. by my head of security, a man who has worked for me for 12 years, a man I trusted with my life." "Where is he now?" Sophia asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to know the answer. "Being questioned." The euphemism hung in the air between them, heavy with implications. "But I don't think he's the architect. He's too simple, too direct. This required planning, timing, access to information about my routines, my schedule, He gestured to the dogs. My weaknesses. Sophia took a step back, suddenly aware of how alone she was, how isolated this villa sat in the countryside, how thoroughly she'd entangled herself in something that had nothing to do with her. I should go, she said. The dogs are stable and I'm clearly in the middle of something I don't understand. You can't leave. Vittorio said it gently, almost apologetically, which somehow made it worse than if he'd been threatening. You're the only person who knows what happened here, besides the people who planned it. You're a witness, and witnesses to attempted murder in my world. He trailed off, letting her imagination fill in the blanks. Are you threatening me? Her voice came out steadier than she felt. I'm protecting you. He moved closer, and she forced herself not to retreat. Whoever did this killed my veterinarian to ensure the dogs would die. What do you think they'll do when they learn a waitress saved them? Instead, Sophia's mouth went dry. She hadn't thought of that. Hadn't considered that saving Bruno and Rex might have painted a target on her own back. How long, she managed, until I find who did this? Vittorio's expression softened slightly. You'll be comfortable. Safe. The dogs clearly like you, and they're excellent judges of character. One of those dogs belonged to a Mafia don. The other had almost been murdered in an assassination attempt. Sophia wasn't sure their judgment should be trusted. But as Rex pushed his head under her hand again, and Bruno's tail thumped weakly against his cushion, she realized she didn't really have a choice. She never had. 3 days passed in the gilded cage of Villa Morello, and Sophia developed a routine that felt surreal in its domesticity. Wake at dawn, check the dog's vitals, breakfast on the terrace while Bruno and Rex dozed in the morning sun. Afternoon walks through gardens, patrolled by men with guns. Dinner alone in her suite, delivered on silver trays by staff who wouldn't meet her eyes. Vittorio appeared sporadically, always asking about the dogs, never staying long. He moved through the villa like a ghost, present but untouchable, followed by his shadow, Marco Tesaro, his right-hand man and consigliere. Not the guard from the terrace, but the other Marco, the one who wore expensive suits and carried himself with the quiet authority of someone who spoke with the Don's voice. Sophia had learned to recognize the hierarchy. The guards at the gates were soldiers. The men who brought her food were staff. But Marco Tesaro was something else entirely. Vittorio's oldest friend, his most trusted advisor, the man who'd stood beside him since they were teenagers in Trastevere. Or so the kitchen staff whispered when they thought she couldn't hear. On the 4th morning, Sophia was checking Rex's collar. He'd been scratching at it obsessively, and she worried about irritation from the poisoning when the smell hit her. It was subtle, expensive, and utterly out of place. Not the smell of dog or leather or the garden herbs that clung to everything in the villa. This was cologne, sophisticated and rare, with notes of bergamot and something darker, more resinous. She'd smelled it before, recently, but couldn't place where. Rex whined as she examined the collar more closely. There, on the inner leather, barely visible, a small stain. Dark. Oily. She brought it closer to her nose, and the scent intensified. The memory clicked into place with the force of a slap. Yesterday afternoon, Marco Tesaro had stopped by the terrace to inform her that Vittorio would be dining in the city and wouldn't be back until late. He'd stood close, closer than necessary, and when he'd leaned down to scratch Bruno behind the ears, she'd caught that same scent. Distinctive. Unmistakable. Her hands started shaking. She forced them still. It made horrible sense. The head of security who'd filled the water bowls was too obvious, too convenient. a fall guy. But someone had to give the order, had to provide the poison, had to ensure the veterinarian couldn't respond. That required access, authority, trust. Marco Tesaro had all three. Sophia's mind raced through the implications. If Marco had poisoned the dogs, it wasn't about the dogs at all. It was about Vittorio. A test run, maybe, or a distraction. Or perhaps the dogs were simply in the way of something larger, some play for power that she couldn't begin to understand. And she was alone in a villa full of people loyal to Marco, with no way to prove what she suspected, no way to reach Vittorio without going through the very man who'd tried to commit murder. "You're pale." Sophia nearly jumped out of her skin. Marco Tesaro stood in the terrace doorway, backlit by the afternoon sun. He wore another impeccable suit, charcoal grey this time, and his smile was pleasant, professional, completely unthreatening. "Just tired," she managed, her hand still on Rex's collar. "The dogs are doing well, though. No complications. Vittorio will be pleased?" Marco moved onto the terrace with the easy confidence of someone who belonged everywhere. "He speaks highly of you. Says you saved his family." The word family seemed weighted with extra meaning. In Vittorio's world, family meant something specific, something that transcended blood. "I just did what anyone with veterinary training would do." Sophia stood, putting herself between Marco and the dogs. Rex growled softly, a sound she'd never heard from him before. Marco's eyes flickered to the dog, then back to her. "Rex doesn't usually take to strangers." "You must have a gift. Animals sense things," Sophia said carefully. "Fear, affection." She paused, watching his face. "Danger." Something shifted in Marco's expression, too quick to catch, but there nonetheless. His smile didn't change, but his eyes did. Calculation replacing warmth, like a mask sliding into place. Indeed they do. He moved to the terrace railing, his back to her, looking out over the gardens. It's a pity about Dottore Ricci. He was very skilled. Finding a replacement with the necessary discretion has been difficult. "I'm sure it has," Sophia said, her heart pounding so hard she was certain he could hear it. "Vittorio is in Rome today, meeting with associates. He won't be back until midnight." Marco turned, and the afternoon sun caught his face at an angle that made him look older, harder. "You're here alone, just you. The dogs and the staff." It wasn't a threat. Not explicitly, but Sophia felt the weight of it anyway, the careful placement of information that was also a warning. "The dogs and I will be fine," she said. Marco smiled again, and this time there was nothing pleasant about it at all. "I'm sure you will be, Signorina. After all, nothing bad happens at Villa Morello." He left, and his cologne lingered in the air like evidence. Sophia waited until his footsteps faded, then pulled out her phone with shaking hands. No bars. The villa's location, so beautifully remote, suddenly felt like a trap. She looked at Bruno and Rex, both watching her with alert intelligence. "We need to survive until midnight," she whispered to them. "Think you can help with that?" Bruno's tail thumped once against the stone. It would have to be enough. The villa had a landline in Vittorio's study. Sophia had seen it 3 days ago when she'd gotten lost trying to find the kitchen. A heavy black telephone on a mahogany desk, the kind that suggested serious conversations and untraceable calls. If she could reach it, if she could call Vittorio directly, if she could warn him before Marco made his next move. The study was on the second floor, east wing. She'd memorized the layout during her captivity, cataloguing exits and passages the way her brain still catalogued symptoms and treatments. Bruno and Rex followed her through the villa's corridors, their nails clicking on marble floors, their presence both comfort and liability. She was halfway up the stairs when she heard voices below. Marco's, unmistakable, giving orders in rapid Italian. Something about the perimeter, about making sure no one leaves, about the evening meal. The words drifted up like smoke signals, spelling out her doom. Sophia changed direction, heading instead for the back of the villa. There was a service exit near the old stables, less monitored, less obvious. She could make it to the road, flag down a car, find a phone somewhere in the countryside. The stable building smelled of old hay and leather, though no horses had lived there in years. It had been converted to storage, garden equipment, furniture covered in white sheets, boxes stacked against stone walls. Dusty sunlight filtered through high windows, creating columns of golden light that would have been beautiful under different circumstances. She was reaching for the exterior door when it opened from the outside. Marco Tesaro stepped through, and behind him, 2 guards pulled the door shut with a finality that made Sophia's stomach drop. "Going somewhere, Signorina Bellini?" He'd dropped the pretense of courtesy. His voice was flat, businesslike, the tone of someone checking items off a list. "Walk," Sophia said, the lie transparent even to her own ears. "The dogs need exercise." The dogs! Marco glanced at Bruno and Rex, both of whom had positioned themselves between him and Sophia, their hackles raised. Remarkable animals, loyal beyond reason. That's why they had to go first, you understand. Vittorio would never eat or drink anything they wouldn't test first. His paranoia is legendary, and those dogs are his tasters. Sophia's back hit a stack of boxes. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Please don't insult either of us." Marco moved deeper into the stable, and the guards flanked the door, blocking any escape. "You figured it out. I saw it on your face on the terrace. The cologne was careless of me, I admit. But then, I didn't expect the dogs to survive. I certainly didn't expect a failed veterinary student to save them." "Vittorio will know," Sophia said, trying to keep her voice steady. "When I disappear, when something happens to me, you'll have run away. A frightened girl, overwhelmed by the world she stumbled into. It happens." Marco's hand disappeared into his jacket, and Sophia tensed, expecting a gun. Instead, he pulled out a small vial of clear liquid. The same compound that nearly killed Bruno and Rex. Fast-acting, painful, but fast. I was going to use it on Vittorio at dinner tonight, a single drop in his wine. The dogs would have tested it first and died, of course. But that was acceptable. They were always collateral damage. "Why?" The question came out as a whisper. "Why?" Marco's laugh was genuinely amused. "Because Vittorio Morello is weak, sentimental. He wastes resources on loyalty and honor like we're still living in the last century. The families in Naples, in Sicily, they're ready for new leadership, modern leadership. And they've promised me their support once the old guard is gone." Bruno growled, a sound that started deep in his chest and built into something primal. Rex joined him, both dogs coiled and ready. "The dogs won't save you," Marco said, nodding to one of the guards. "Marco, bring him." The guard disappeared through a side door Sophia hadn't noticed. When he returned, he was struggling to control a massive dog, some kind of pit bull mix, all muscle and poorly healed scars. The animal's eyes were wild, desperate, and when it saw Sophia and the shepherds, it began lunging against its chain with enough force to drag the guard forward. "Fighting dog," Marco explained casually. "Rescued from a ring in Napoli. Never properly socialized, never trained, deeply traumatized. Tends to attack anything that moves. We've been keeping him here, trying to decide what to do with him." Sophia's blood turned to ice. "You can't. I can. I will." Marco moved toward the door, the guards following. Your death will be tragic. You were trying to help another abused animal, and it turned on you. Vittorio will blame himself for keeping you here. It will break something in him, make him vulnerable. And then, he made a casual gesture, as if poisoning someone was no more significant than choosing a wine. The guard released the fighting dog's chain and ran for the door. The animal stood for a moment, confused, then focused on the closest living things: Bruno, Rex, and Sophia. "I'm sorry," Marco said, and he actually sounded like he meant it. "You should have stayed a waitress." The door slammed shut, a lock clicked into place, and the traumatized dog charged. The confrontation happened 3 days later in the villa's main dining room, where Vittorio conducted the business that couldn't be discussed anywhere the authorities might listen. Sophia stood near the window, Bruno and Rex flanking her like sentries, while 20 of Vittorio's most trusted men filled the room. The air was thick with tension and expensive cologne, with the weight of violence waiting to be unleashed. She'd told Vittorio everything the night he'd found her in the stables, bloodied but alive, cradling the traumatized fighting dog's head while Bruno and Rex stood guard. She'd expected him not to believe her, to dismiss her accusations against his oldest friend. Instead, he'd listened with that same terrible stillness he'd shown when the dogs were dying, absorbing information like a computer processing data. Then he'd made phone calls, quiet calls to people who knew things, who could trace poison purchases and phone records and money transfers to Napoli. It had taken 48 hours to build the case, to gather the evidence, to confirm what Sophia's nose had detected on a dog collar. Marco Tesaro stood in the center of the room now, not yet understanding that he was already dead. He looked relaxed, confident. A man who'd stood in this position 1,000 times before as Vittorio's voice and enforcer. "Gentlemen," Vittorio said quietly, and the room fell silent. "We're here because there's been a betrayal. Someone in this family tried to kill me." A murmur ran through the assembled men. Hands moved toward weapons, eyes darted, searching for the threat. "Someone I trusted," Vittorio continued, his voice never rising. "Someone who had access to everything. My schedule, my routines, my weaknesses." His eyes finally settled on Marco, and Sophia saw her former employer's face drain of color. "Someone who thought loyalty was negotiable." "Vittorio," Marco started, but Vittorio held up one hand. "The dogs were poisoned 4 days ago, sodium cyanide in their water bowls. My veterinarian was murdered to ensure they would die without treatment." He pulled out a folder, dropped it on the dining table. Bank transfers from a Naples account to the head of security. Phone records showing coordination with the Calabresi family, and testimony from someone who had no reason to lie and every reason to stay silent. Every eye in the room turned to Sophia. She felt the weight of their attention. These men who'd killed and stolen and broken laws she couldn't begin to imagine. But Bruno pressed against her leg, and Rex's shoulder was solid under her hand, and somehow that made her strong enough to hold their stares. "The girl?" Marco's voice held contempt, desperately grasping for control. "You believe a waitress over me? Over 20 years of brotherhood?" "I believe," Vittorio said softly, "that brotherhood ends where poison begins." Marco must have sensed it then, must have felt the shift in the room as the other men moved subtly away from him, creating distance from the condemned. His hand moved toward his jacket, toward whatever weapon he carried there. "Sophia," Vittorio said, not looking at her. She'd practiced this. Vittorio had shown her the hand signals 36 times over the past 2 days, working with Bruno and Rex, until they responded to her commands as perfectly as they'd once responded to their masters. German shepherds, he'd explained, were bred for intelligence and loyalty. They learned quickly. They never forgot a threat. Sophia raised her right hand, fingers positioned in a gesture that looked casual, but meant everything to the dogs beside her. Bruno and Rex moved. They didn't bark, didn't snarl. They simply crossed the room with the fluid grace of predators who'd been waiting for permission, and suddenly Marco was on the ground with 200 pounds of muscle and teeth preventing any chance of escape. His gun clattered across the marble floor, kicked away by one of the other men. "They remember you," Sophia said quietly. "They remember your smell, your voice, the moment they started dying. Dogs never forget who tries to kill them." Marco was screaming now, begging. The carefully constructed facade of the sophisticated consigliere shattered into something raw and terrified. Vittorio walked over slowly, looked down at the man who'd been his brother. "Take him to the wine cellar," he said to two of the guards. "Make sure he understands the price of betrayal before he pays it." They dragged Marco away, Bruno and Rex following until Sophia called them back with a low whistle. The room emptied quickly after that, men departing with the efficiency of people who knew when to be absent, until only Sophia and Vittorio remained. "You could leave now," he said, still looking at the spot where Marco had fallen. "I'd make sure you were safe. Set you up somewhere far from Rome, far from all of this." Sophia thought about her studio apartment, with its broken shower and overdue rent notices. She thought about serving coffee to people who looked through her, about the medical degree she'd never finish, about the life she'd been living 4 days ago. Then she looked at Bruno and Rex, at the villa around her, at the man who'd destroyed her old life and inadvertently given her a new one. "I think I'll stay," she said. 2 weeks later, Sophia walked through the Piazza Navona with Bruno and Rex on leather leashes, wearing a dress that cost more than she used to make in a year. People moved aside as she passed, not because of the dogs, but because of what the dogs represented. Everyone in Rome knew who owned German shepherds like these, and everyone knew that the woman who commanded them was no longer someone to be dismissed. She passed Café Imperial and saw through the window that they were hiring again. The manager, her old manager, looked up, met her eyes, and went pale with recognition. Sophia smiled, not unkindly, but not kindly either. Then she kept walking, the queen of the Morello family, with her guardians at her side.